Hello everyone. So I was recently reorganizing a shelf I hadn't touched in a while, and as I was finishing up, I found something truly amazing. Imagine my surprise when I found these beauties, the official Minecraft guidebooks. As I read them while reminiscing about my times playing the game using these guides all those years ago, I eventually made it to the Construction Handbook, which holds simple tutorials for some easy builds. I then had an idea. And that brings us to what I'll be doing in this video. I'll be transforming each of these builds in the guide and then using them to design a city. But before we get into that, there are some rules I put in place for my build transformations. Firstly, I want to retain the feel that the original build held. For example, since the floating island has a fort on top, I'm not allowed to build a statue or a UFO or something else up there instead. Another rule is that I'm only allowed to use the same materials as the original builds. However, I am allowed to use variants of those materials. So, since the wooden house uses oak logs, planks, and stairs, I am allowed to use any other oak wood material, such as the trapdoor or the slab, but I am not allowed to use birch or spruce or any other wood that wasn't used in the original. To make it easier to know what I am allowed to use, I made two chests. One holds the materials that the original build used, while the other chest holds everything I'm going to use in my build transformation. Now with that out of the way, let's get started with the very first build in the guide, the wooden house. The guide uses these materials. Here's everything I'll be using. There are a lot of ways I thought about going about this, but I decided to build 4 different houses of varying size to place throughout the city, and though I want them to have plenty of detail, remaining simple in nature is the priority. This first house had a lot of inspiration from certain villager homes in the base game. That village in the background actually helped a little bit in figuring out the shape and materials I wanted to use. While I was there, some villagers warned me that a family of 3 villagers and their pet had all recently gone missing. I hope they are found soon, but who knows what happened to them. It is a big shame how dangerous the world is able to be sometimes. Anyway, this first house will end up being the most different from the house in the guide since it is much smaller, but I still wanted to bring in some features from the guide's house, so I added little things like the windows and the roof and a chimney. I wanted this next house to have a very different shape from the rest, though I tried to build it in a way that would fit in with the others once I started pasting the houses into the city. This one was loosely inspired by this village house. I liked the way that the house had a boxy yet tall shape. I figured it would help diversify the feel of the city. All of the houses are going to be made primarily of wood, and since wood is well known for its fire resistance, I originally thought it might be a good idea to add some lava hot tubs to the houses, but I forgot to add them in, so maybe some other time. The third house will have a lot of features that are noticeably inspired by the guide. It will serve as sort of a medium-sized house for the city as well. I wanted it to be a sort of smaller, more pressed version of the reference. You can really see the shape of the reference in the foundation here. The front of the house went through a lot of trial and error until I ended up getting what I wanted though. The first designs appeared unsatisfyingly flat at the top. It wasn't really that hard to fix. I even decided on the roof being split between 3 parts of the wall to remedy it even further. I decided not to extend the roof all the way to the front since it just fits better on the sides, since the front has less depth. I have a feeling this roof would not fare well in the rain though, but I'll let the citizens deal with that. Also, it's a little hard to see, but there's some path I added under it by the window as well. I ended up adding the same thing on the other side, mainly due to the reference also having it on both sides. The overall shape of this house makes it seem as though there are 3 houses that are sort of molded together. It almost resembles a sort of mini apartment building in a way actually, especially from the front and back. Surely there's enough room for a few families of villagers in there, right? Although, now that I think about it, the average villager doesn't really get the right to live in a nice house, do they? Anyway, with the other houses out of the way, it is now time to build the final and largest house. The other ones had parts of the reference mixed into their designs, but this house will be entirely inspired by the original. I had decided to go ahead and put more detail into this one to give it some more pizzazz. You'd assume that adding more detail would make this more challenging, but funnily enough, despite this one definitely taking the longest to build out of the four, it also ended up being the easiest for me to build. I didn't really need to stop and imagine what to do next as much as the other houses. I just sort of did it for the most part. I will say though, the front of the house did go through some changes until I was satisfied, but the process overall was very smooth. I really think this house turned out really well. I especially love the windows along the upper floor. Now with this final build finished, we are done with the wooden houses. These 4 homes will be the living spaces for our city. But if we place them now, there would be nothing stopping the city from getting attacked by all sorts of things. We are gonna need some solid defense. And what better defense is there than a massive wall? This is the wall in the guide, along with its used materials. This is everything I will be using. I wanted this wall to be very detailed and a little bit intimidating. I played around with a few different designs and ended up with this. Pillars ended up being the spotlight for this design. I even placed walls in between the pillars to give it even further depth. Originally, I wanted both tiers of the wall to be functional, but I changed my mind because I didn't want it to be too wide, so I just did the top part. Speaking of the top, I actually forgot to place torches while I was up there, but I'll do it later, so no worries. Surely no monsters will spawn up there, right? I also thought about using mossy stone with the damaged ones to give it a more ancient feel, but I ended up not doing it since I felt I was already doing a rather large amount for this build. The wall may seem finished, but do you really expect me to just place these around my houses and be done with it? No. We need something more. Something stylish. Something grand. We need a tower. The guide's tower uses mostly the same materials as the wall. Here's what we have to work with though. The tower was probably the most fun thing for me to build out of everything we've built so far, which isn't much, but you know what I mean. I'm not sure why, but I was positive that this was going to turn out really well. Design-wise, it was similar to the wall but more bent and rounded to follow the nature of the tower's shape. I really wanted the tower to be a staple of the visual identity of the city. I made sure to give it plenty of detail and depth to give it an enthralling feel regardless of distance. As fun as this was to build, here you can see I fixed a bit of an uh-oh oopsie. What happened was I forgot the tower was attached to the wall and needed ample space for an entrance into the tower. Granted, I wasn't actually going to design the interior, but there needed to be enough space to give the illusion of an entrance. The center part of the tower, where the wall led into it, was turned into the tallest part in order to fix this. With that issue fixed, the other parts of the tower were finished without many problems. Now, with the awesome tower and walls finished, I'd say it's about time to find a place to build the city. I had a very broad idea of how I wanted the terrain to be made, so I just laid down a simple foundation that I felt would help me figure out where to put everything later. As I prepared the land, I began to have a better idea of where I would place everything. This is just a rough draft for now though. Before getting into what would go where, we first need to figure out the wall placements, and so that's what we have next. I decided to have towers span along the entire wall instead of just the edges, And the shape of the whole wall will be a large rectangle, since that's how I always imagined the reference whenever I saw it as a child. Once I finished the walls, there was plenty of terraforming that needed to be done before building anything else. Oh yeah, for those who don't know why sand is often used in terraforming, it is due to sand being one of the few things affected by gravity in this game. Plus it stands out against most pellets a lot better than, say, gravel, which makes it easier to notice and shape as you see fit for whatever you're building. Since I'm just preparing the land's shape, I'll change everything to grass here very soon, but first we need to smooth the place out so I have room to build the rest of the stuff in the guide. Having a natural feel to the shapes and slopes is always nice when terraforming like this. I'll add them in as I go though, since there's still a lot we need to do. Since we have a decent foundation to build on, it is now time to turn the sand into grass. I also went ahead and further smoothed out the land in a few spots that I felt needed it. With the general area finished, I then made an entrance for the city facing the ocean in preparation for certain other builds later in the video. I then used 100% of my brain and had the ingenious idea of making another entrance on the opposite side facing the plains. Truly unbelievable. 2 entrances is probably enough for our settlement to function. Eventually I'll need to place a road between the 2 entrances for a sort of highway, but for now let's move on. Now that we have the general area figured out, we can now begin building inside the city. What better way to start inside the walls than with the city's center of government, the Royal Hall. After the sublime beauties that were the wall and tower, I thought it may do some good to try and give this build a design that would match well with the other buildings while still standing out. The 4 houses that were made earlier are going to be placed all over the inside of the city, and even surrounding the Royal Hall as well. I originally was going to have one side of the hall be much wider than the other and build some type of spire or platform there maybe, but I changed my mind after seeing how well the towers fit into the roof. Something to note about this build though is since the throne room is explicitly shown in the guide, I will be building it. But first we need to do the outside. I did go ahead and set up the interior for when we get to it though. The entrance to the hall went through a lot of changes due to my non-existent vision for it. At first I made a sort of dungeon-y shape, but I ended up playing around with different shapes and supports until I got something decent. I thought the windows were a little flat, so I added some depth to them using walls. I did the same thing for the towers as well. Seeing it now, this whole building may not be as lavish as the tile Royal Hall would have you assume, but I mainly wanted this to be able to fit seamlessly with the rest of the city while still having its own personality. At this point the exterior was nearly finished, I just needed some texture for the walls, and I did end up changing the entrance design for the 20th time as well. And after some last minute touch-ups, it's now time to go inside and build the throne room. I had the whole idea for the inside of the hall pretty well figured out by the time I started. The only somewhat hard part was figuring out what I wanted to do with the ceiling. The reference to use massive log supports, but I ended up going with rows of alternating logs and slabs since I decided I didn't really want the upper floor to be visible from the bottom. I made a semi-luxurious throne that feels worthy of the behind of this small city's ruler, and then made some changes to the pillars. I decided to treat the floor similarly to the reference, but with some more texture. Those holes in the floor are indeed a tripping hazard, but it's nothing some forced labor won't fix, poor villagers. The roof throughout the entire room was still pretty bare for the most part, so I gave it some much needed improvements through some trapdoors and fences. But with the roof fully wrapped up, we are now finished with the Royal Hall. With the Royal Hall finished, I decided it was time to place the wooden houses. Now you may be wondering when I placed all of those roads, since after all they weren't there just a moment ago. Well, you see what happened was I spent a good 30-ish minutes placing them down before I realized that I never turned replay mod on. I'm just glad I noticed when I did instead of after finishing all the house placements and having to do it all over again. But now, With the houses placed, the city is starting to feel alive, but there's still some empty space we need to fill. And so we are now on the next build in the guide, the one and only floating island. The guide uses these materials, but everything I'll be using is in here. I was stumped for a good while on what I was going to do with this build. I had a bunch of ideas, such as having it out in the ocean somewhere, or maybe super high above the city, or maybe even having a bunch of islands surrounding the walls. I eventually decided to try building it in that empty portion of the city. I reimagined the reference a little bit by having the floating island be more of an unnatural event instead of a normal floating island. My idea was that something disastrous happened at this fort, which ended up with part of it being ripped out of the ground and suspended in the air, tearing the walls and ground up in the process. It is unknown why this happened in the first place, but needless to say, it terrifies the citizens to this very day. Hopefully it doesn't just fall one day and destroy that whole area around the fort, but who knows for sure. I personally believe it is totally safe and should be trusted to the utmost, since I'm positive nothing bad will happen. Probably. Now you may have noticed that I suddenly changed into Steve. I have no idea why that happened, but for now let's just pretend it's a side effect of the floating island phenomenon. Those who approach the floating island will not leave as the same person they were when they entered. Literally.
I am Steve.
Identity theft aside, this build wasn't too hard overall. The tower was the only somewhat tough part to figure out, but once that was good, the rest was pretty easy. I even managed to fit some lore in there for good measure. With the fort done, let's do some minor stuff before the next big build. The wooden houses in the guide has side stuff that you are able to build in the yard of the house. These are the materials from the original, and here's what I'm using. The guide gives you a few ideas for things to build: a small garden, a pool, flower little arrangements. I decided to add some of these to a few of the houses while also fixing some of the terrain along the way. I didn't add something to every single house, I just chose random ones and added whatever I felt would fit there the best. Eventually I will add a lot more to the yards in terms of grasses, hedges, and whatnot, but with all that done, let's just move on for now. I am not Steve. As a child, I yearned for the mines. Many years later, that yearn still burns just as brightly. But sadly, the guide doesn't have any builds for a mine anywhere. Even reading the guide over and over again didn't help in the slightest. It seems that my childhood dream will go unfulfilled, and my pickaxe will remain untouched and rusting. I just wanted to add a mine to my city, but the guide has nothing even resembling one. Or does it? Hear me out. What if we turn the roller coaster, made with all these materials, into a mine shaft for the city using all this stuff? Now that we have a plan, let us begin. So originally, I really was not sure where I would put the roller coaster. It didn't really feel as though it would fit in really anywhere in the city. I thought about possibly using it outside the city somewhere, but I eventually thought of instead repurposing it into a mine. I actually got this idea from noticing that the reference is partially underground. It will fit more with the theme of the build transformations while also fitting well with the city. When I initially mined the shape out, I went all the way down into deep slate level, but I ended up staying in the stone area after realizing just how unnecessarily deep the tunnel was. I also felt it would fit better with the stuff I had to build with to stay with the stone. I only added a teensy bit of lighting to give off an eerie feel that would remain all the way down. I wanted the mine to have a mildly unsettling, unsafe atmosphere despite the signs that people have been down here. But who's to say how dangerous the mines really are? Maybe it's totally safe, and you are good to mine until your inventory is overflowing with ores and stone. Or perhaps there's something sinister waiting patiently. Nah, I'm sure we're totally fine. Oh, diamonds, sweet. Heck yeah, man. What? Did you think something was gonna happen? It's just diamonds, man. Oh my god! We now have all of the major builds for the city's interior finished. All that's left are some minor things, such as these fountains. Once everything is finished, I will polish the terrain and add some more smaller things one final time. But before any of that, we do still have things to do outside of the city walls. Up until now, everything I've done has been inside the city, but there are still plenty of things that can be improved on the outside, starting with some much needed terraforming and shaping along the walls. That grass was not looking good. It was hanging all over the place. I didn't really want to do anything too insane with the ground, so I just made it match the surroundings in a semi-natural way. Also, I didn't show it here, but at some point I ran through and bone mealed the area to get some vegetation in there. Once I finish the terrain though, we are on to the next build in the guide. The bridge is what we're gonna build next. It probably has one of the best designs in the guide. And it only uses these materials. I'm gonna use all of this to build something really neat though. I had a pretty good idea for what I was gonna do for the bridge before I even started. There were some things about the guide's bridge I was fond of and didn't really want to change. The gravel pathing stayed since I thought it was honestly fine. The gravel just makes sense as a traversable path, I guess. I like the ring shape from the reference, so I did something similar here, but with a more layered approach. I almost wanted to do a ton of smaller rings along the lower part, but I'm glad I went with this instead. This bridge is going to span along the entire ocean outside of the city, and will attach to another mainland on the other side, allowing for travel between the two landmasses. There may or may not be a neighboring nation on that other landmass, but we won't worry about that for now. Once the bridge was in place, I made some preparations for the next major build by adding a raisable part of the bridge and adding ports to the nearby beach. We are now ready for the final build at last, the galleon. Here are the guide's materials, and here's what I'll use. Let's get right to it. I find it interesting that the guide decided to specify that this is supposed to be a galleon and not just a ship. If you aren't aware, galleon refers to really a broad amount of ships, but mostly a type of ship used from around the 15th to 18th centuries by Spain. They were used originally for battle purposes and transporting arms, but were later repurposed into purely the transportation of goods. For the purpose of transforming the reference, I decided not to build a proper galleon, but instead take some inspiration from historic design, with most of the inspiration being seen in the masts. I also had to redo the port I made earlier since it was just so tiny. And now here we have a simple ship that will serve mainly as transport for our residents and goods. I'd say that this should serve its purpose well enough, but why have one when you could have two? This one is sailing out somewhere. I have no idea where it is going, but hopefully not somewhere dangerous. Now that we have our ships in place, all that's left to do is some simple pathing from the city to the port and bridge to bring everything together. With that, the city is finished at last. It is now time to admire everything in its entirety. I did some final touch-ups to the terrain and added some minor stuff, so everything is good to go. Now sit your booty down right now and enjoy some absolute cinema. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this little project of mine. Feel free to do all the YouTube stuff down below if you want, and have an amazing rest of your day.